One night, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out and before he went to bed, he said to his wife, How would it be if we were to sit up tonight and see who it is that does us this service? His wife agreed and set a light to burn. Then they both hid in the corner of the room behind some coats that were hanging up, and then they began to watch. As soon as it was midnight, they saw come in two neatly formed naked little men. He seated themselves before the shoemaker's table and took up the work that was already prepared, and began to stitch, to pierce, and to hammer so cleverly and quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker's eyes could scarcely follow them. So full of wonder was he, and that they never left off until everything was finished and was standing ready on the table. And then they jumped up and ran off. The next morning, the shoemaker's wife said to her husband, Those little men have made us rich, and we ought to show ourselves grateful. With all their running about and having nothing to cover them, they must be very cold. I'll tell you what, I'll make little shirts, coats, waistcoats, and breeches for them, and knit each of them a pair of stockings, and you shall make each of them a pair of shoes. The husband consented willingly, and at night when everything was finished, they laid the gifts together on the table, instead of the cutout work, and places themselves so that they could observe how the little men would behave. When midnight came, they rushed in, ready to set to work. But when they found, instead of pieces of prepared leather, the neat little garments put ready for them, they stood a moment in surprise, and then they showed the greatest delight. With the greatest swiftness they took up the pretty garments and slipped them on, singing, What spruce and dandy boys are we! No longer cobblers we will be. Then they hopped and danced about, jumping over the chairs and tables, and at last they danced out at the door. From that time they were never seen again, but it always went well with the shoemaker as long as he lived, and whatever he took in hand prospered.
So, for this project, I decided to do the story of the Elves and the Shoemaker, and the place on campus that I could find that made the most sense for shoemakers was, in my opinion, the arts building, because when it comes to shoemaking, back in the old days, we didn't it shoemaking wasn't industrialized per se. It wasn't streamlined. It wasn't an assembly line for it. Industrialization hadn't been come up with yet. So basically, each and every pair of shoe took a lot of craftsmanship to do. It wasn't something that you could just come up and pick off the shelf. You had to go to a shoemaker, get your measurements, and then wait for depending on the shoemaker, a certain amount of time for the shoes to be made, and then you would get your pair of shoes. Now, that sort of a thing takes a lot of time and effort, and of course, you have to do all of that with also making not only something that would be very durable or useful, as is a shoe. It's sort of equipment to be used every day or maybe at special events, so it also had to be very fashionable. So of course that in itself, I would say, is an art form, because you had all these restraints. You were working with leather, then rubber. Back in the old days, the bottom of the shoes were wood, so you had to do some carving as well. And of course, those are all art forms that we can recognize. Sculpting, even embroidery is an art form. Something that we don't see today with shoes per se. Shoes still look very pretty, well made, very cool. I have many pair of shoes, and I find them to be very pleasing to watch. But the craftsmanship that they would put back into shoes a long time ago just isn't there. But nonetheless, I still like my shoes. Anyways, but when it comes to the story, what I liked about it is that it's one of those stories that actually has a happy ending. It's not really something that goes about showing any faults of the main characters. The shoemaker himself is a very good person, and so is his wife. Actually, that's what I liked about it, because it's a telling of a moral, which is being grateful for the things that you have, for the help that you get from others. But it's not done so at the expense of a main character that decides to do something wrong and has to be corrected for it. The shoemaker doesn't neglect or do anything bad to make the elves stop like helping him. No, it's actually his show of gratefulness that, of course, was his wife brought up the idea, but you can see that he himself was very much on board with the whole idea of thanking the elves, and it's only after that the elves go away, you know. But even then, at the end of the story, it says that he went on to prosper. So regardless, you know, it's still a happy ending. He was able to show his gratefulness, but also he was still able to live, you know, that happily ever after that we want to see in fairy tales. So that's why I chose this, and I really liked this story.